those of you who don't know
Recording
me.
in progress.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. So we're going to get started. Thanks for joining us for the quarterly board meeting of the Albany Pine Bush. This is a hybrid meeting with several people present in person as well as virtually. So let's start off with a round of introductions. Instead of me naming everybody, I thought we'd just go around and name ourselves. So I will kick us off. Tony Luisi. I'm also the Regional Director of DEC Region 4. Chris?
I'm Chris Sauber. I'm the Executive Director of Pine Bush Commission.
The Holsworth Natural Resource Steward for the Saratoga Capital District of New York State Parks, filling in for Elaine Jr.
Harvey Alexander, citizen member.
Nancy Pearson, citizen member.
And John Rust, the same citizen member.
Don Saycox, pinch hitting for Peter Barber from Canada.
And on the screen, we have
Jessica?
Hi, I'm Jess Otney. I'm with the Nature Conservancy.
And Brad?
Hey, Brad Glass, City of Albany.
Anyone else virtually as a member of the board? All right, I think thank you all. And we also have a lot of members of the staff team from the Pine Bush here in the room with us, and I believe virtually. So before we get into the public comment opportunity, first call to order is to consider the draft meeting minutes from the December board meeting, which have been included in the board packets. Does anyone have any questions or comments on those minutes? If not, can I have a motion to approve?
I will make that motion.
John Press,
I'll second.
Nancy Pearson. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. All right, then moving on. Are there any members of the public who wish to provide a comment?
Yeah, I guess I
Bob,
will.
did you want to report for the Friends?
Yeah, I'll report for the Friends. This is Bob Kazee. So Richard couldn't make it today. He got stuck in Florida, poor guy. But anyway, our annual report's now available. So I thought I'd mention that. So I'm reading off of Richard's list here. And Don in the report gave a shout out to the Save the Pine Bush organization for the past work. And Darwin Rusa and Mike Matthews completed their 9 years of continuous service on the board and have now rotated off. And we want to thank them for their service. Darwin was still volunteering and was recently played Nabokov at the recent Discover the Night at the Discovery Center last month. In our budget, there are 25 programs that we've supported, either partially or fully. And the Ticket to Ride program for school bus rides to schools is now back up and running after the little COVID hiatus. And there are also non-monetary programs we've got started, such as meetup hikes that we're sponsoring and leading, and book discussion quarterly events that we have now. And we're funding some of the, the educational interns, the spring, summer, and fall interns. And of course, we put in a lot of volunteer hours. So I guess that's basically a little wrap up of the main highlights.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you for everything the Friends
right.
does for the commission. Bob, did you have anything more?
That's it. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions? I'm happy to answer questions.
Are there any questions for Bob? All right, any other members of the public who wish to say something? All right, thank you. Moving on in the agenda for my report as Commission Chair, I don't have too much to report. I will say two things. One is this time of year, we find ourselves in budget season for New York State. We were very happy to see that Governor Hochul included in the 2024 executive budget proposal a continuation of the $3 million appropriation from the EPF for the Pine Bush that was included in last year's budget, which at that time was an increase of at least $300,000. I think it was $325,000 increase over 2022. The budget season is still pending, so we'll see, what the final outcome is. But we were happy to see the continuation of that $3 million appropriation. The other point I'll mention is today is the first day of the statewide residential burn ban. The commissioner was here last week with our forest rangers to make that announcement, and that runs through May 14th, and that applies broadly across the state with certain limited exclusions. And of course, it's intended to mitigate the risk of wildfires. So obviously that's some, wildfire and prescribed burns is something that the Pine Bush knows a lot about. So thought I would mention that here. That is it for my report, but are there any other board members who wish to report out any news?
So just adding to the budget update, the one house budgets came out 2 days ago, and the Assembly is proposing to increase the Environmental Protection Fund to $435 million from $400 million. The Senate's proposing $500 million, and within the Senate budget, they do increase the Albany Pine Bush Commission allocation from $3 million to $4.5 million, which is really exciting. So we'll be communicating with senators and Assembly members that if they're growing the EPF, that this program should grow along with it.
That's great. Thanks, Jess.
Thank you.
Any other members of the board? All right, then I'll turn it over to Chris.
Okay, thank you. If you, in your board packet, you may have noticed there's what we call the commission update, which is the memo that Patty puts together, organized by all the input from staff and the departments. It's in a new format. So thank you, Patty and Wendy, for that new format. It's more attractive, easier to put together. Some of the highlights in that specifically is we did Discover the Night throughout the entire week of winter break, February break, with lots of activities in person and virtual. And we brought back Night at the Discovery Center. That was the Wednesday of that week. That was attended by over 200 people, even with a snowstorm. So a great big thanks to Beth McCollum, our volunteer outreach coordinator, and other staff to pull that off. That was a cool event. We had live wildlife, we had interactive things. We had Steve Campbell showing people how bird banding works in person. And we haven't done Night at the Discovery Center since November of 19. So it was nice to get back. We probably would have doubled that attendance if we didn't have snow. What else is there? Some other updates. We're getting close working on a project, a land project of 8 acres with Mohawk Hudson Land Conservancy. They are this close to closing on it, and we will work together with them and a number of the other partners who made it possible, including our friends groups and Albany County. And if it works out the way it should, it will be our first connection directly with Woodlawn Preserve. So we'll work on that press release. Hopefully that'll get out. It'll be ready to be announced in April. Also in that update, there is a windows assessment for this building by Greenman Peterson, GPI. They did a windows assessment working with Lake Etchison, Casey Etchison, our Discovery Center manager, and our property managers to assess the windows in this building that was built in 1987. That's when those windows went in, so you can imagine what the thermal imaging looks like for those windows. So they looked at the windows, they looked at the skylights, they looked at the doors, they also looked at the masonry. And of course, their recommendation, no surprise, is that while they're pretty pleased that the windows have lasted this long, they do need to be replaced. And they did a ballpark estimate of the cost, looking at just one company with Bird Safe Glass, was around $460,000. So I don't know what that really means because you're going to have to bid it. So we will bid that out, and we will assess it there. So it's something it's a necessary improvement to the building, and it goes along the lines of the grounds project, which we'll hear from Aaron. That will have to be coordinated with the grounds project. Then he works with the facade, and then it ties it in directly to the increased sustainability of this whole structure. As a state building, more and more of that is going to have to increase. Things like electric charging stations, more solar energy to offset the heating and cooling and the electricity of the building. So that will be coming too. I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Chris.
Any questions for Chris? And we will turn it over to Neil, who I believe is virtual.
Correct. Hopefully you can see and hear me, but let me know if that's not the case.
Yep.
We're good? Thanks. Thank you, Tony. Yeah, real briefly, there is not a written report for updating you on the technical committee's activities. This quarter, the committee met once and reviewed a laundry list of projects that we had reviewed in the past and briefly talked about the management plan update. Well, excuse me, I will have a report for you next quarter. Staff, particularly Tyler and I, continue refining recommendations for updating the fire management plan. Again, that's an appendix to the management plan update. And that's incorporating both steer staff and peer input. And if you put those together, you get steer, staff and peer input. Additionally, the education and communication departments are also working on updating their respective plans. Again, those are appendices to the management plan. We anticipate completing the draft fire management plan by the June commission meeting. So hopefully we will have a draft of that available for you to see and to give you a more detailed report on the proposed changes. But it looks like we're on target to finish any recommendations for updating the management plan this year. Hopefully by December, you will all be able to consider those updated appendices for incorporation. And I think that's all that I have for you. If you all have questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them, but appreciate the time.
Unless there are any questions for Neil, we will move. Thank you, Neil, for that update. We will move on to financial reporting. Lisa.
Good morning. Over there?
Yeah, you can stay on the back. They shoot you up by the camera. Nothing like a hybrid meeting.
You'll do. All right. The financial report goes for January 31st, which gives us 10 months of revenue for the year. We have February and March left to go. We'll start with the statement of financial activities on the revenue side. Revenues, dues and contributions are $10,000 higher than budget, and this is due to increased trust donations versus our budget for the year, and we will end up about $13,000 over for the year on that. So it's great news. Government grants is at 87% of budget, and this is directly related, as you'll see when I get to expenses, lower expenses. So our revenues and our expenses all came in about 90%. And that will show up in contractual down below. So I'll get to that detail. Mitigation fees are $2,600 over budget. This is due to National Grid deferred revenue being utilized. Our Albany landfill mitigation funds are a little bit under, but the National Grid helped put us up a little bit over budget. Lease revenue is on budget for the year. Other revenue is $16,000 higher than budget. And we have had an increase in merchandise sales and Discovery Center this year, which will show on the bottom too. Great sales. Congratulations on that. And we budgeted higher next year due to that. Total revenue came in at 90% of budget through the month of January. Moving on to expenses. And I made a note, Chris, if you can just toggle down to the bottom.
Oh, yes.
This personnel and fringe line, I included our non-cash expenses
them in because our actual cash salaries and benefits are $258,000 higher. Because we received a credit, which is unusual, from both our retirement fund for the year and our OPEB fund for the year, which are generally very big liabilities. So that will show on the bottom as I go through this, and we will also see that on the balance sheet. So unusual kind of year. So I put that money back up into our personnel because that's actually what we pay out during payroll, and that's actually what we pay out in our benefit line. So it came at 94% with the OPEB credit added in and with the New York State retirement credit added back in. Salaries down a little bit because we have 2 vacant positions for a few months, and we had 1 less educational seasonal, 4 less stewardship seasonal, and a little less than fire budget. Travel and training, 40% of budget. This is due to less training and travel across departments, 4 staff are fired, 4 less stewardship training, and we have a few conflicts due to illness and other things throughout the year, so this will end up under budget for the year. Contractual is 88% of budget through January. This is DC projects and utilities and things that will catch up in February and March, but we will end up about $2.4 million below budget on that line, which relates to the $2 million will be under grant revenue. And this was our rollover from last year. We had a placeholder that we had to put $2.09 million in that we are not going to spend. We're using that hopefully in future years for capital projects and large projects coming up. So that will roll over. But as I said, we'll be about 90% revenue and 90% expenses. So that will all balance out. We'll continue that rollover through next year and through our contract. Communication is very close to budget. We'll be a little bit over budget for the year. We had 9 special events this year, which were fantastic, and we budgeted for 3. So we used a little money from other departments to make up for that. Supplies and equipment, occupancy, is 71% of budget. That's our utilities and contingencies for repairs. Might be slightly under budget, but pretty close. Supplies and equipment are $36,000 under budget. This is for computer equipment through January. We since bought some, so this will catch up. Might be slightly under. All other expenses, 96% of budget, and this is due to gift shop purchases. They were a little bit less than budgeted, but we ordered up a bunch because we had a lot of supplies. Total expenses came in under budget at 90%. So both revenue and expenses came in at 90%, giving us an operating surplus of $48,000. And again, that $48,000 includes the added credits back in for the New York State retirement. So we go down to the non-capital balance sheet account. This does not show up on our income statement, but we show this as our cash. We did not bill our conceptual design project, and we will not bill it through March. This will occur most likely in April. So we will be under for here on that. If we move down to the non-cash revenue and expenses, here you'll see our OPEB credit of $67,000. Typically, we budgeted $820,000 of the liability expense, and it came in as a credit. This is due to interest rates actually being increased, so our present value is less liability than we would need over a 20-year amortization period. And we may see that again next year in the account. Depreciation, $230,000, and our net loss investment was $482,000, giving us the total change in net position. And this is the number that shows up on our audit. So this would be our final audit as we look at January. Right now, it's $405,000. Any questions on that? Okay. And for a statement of net assets, we set up there. Cash and cash equivalents are higher. In March, we haven't spent a lot of money, a little less spending. We're going to come under budget on the expenses. And we received $128,000 payment from our federal fire grant. Grants receivable, a little bit less than budget. This is made up of our federal grant of $21,000 and our DEC grant owed of $73,000. DEC has been paid, and we do have a deferred revenue in there to use. Accounts receivable is $26,000, and that is our quarterly mitigation, which has been paid. Inventory slightly increased due to purchases to replenish all the merchandise in the shop. Prepaid expenses decreased $79,000. You'll see that in March, this will be our highest number, and these are just expenses that occur that we have to pay now that occur next year. So in March, we will always see a higher number there. Investments decreased $512,000, and this is due to a transfer of land, which we purchased, you'll see below, of $30,000, $482,000, and market volatility. Capital assets decreased $230,000. This is our monthly depreciation expense. Land increased $30,000. So here's the land purchase. Due to the purchase, and congratulations, Chris, nice job. A lot of hard work on that. 128 Cordell Road parcel. Deferred outflows. The next two line items is our retirement actuarial report, which is given to us by the New York State retirement system every year. There's a new line item called the net pension asset. This is typically a liability. And this report is really long. It takes the entire New York State pension fund for everyone. And then we are given a proportionate share of those funds. It's usually a liability. This year, it came in as an asset for the entire fund. So we recorded an asset instead of a liability, which gives us a credit. Again, unusual. We don't know if we're going to see that again next year. But the net really is a $23,000 change in assets, so very slight on this account. Total assets decreased $659,000, mainly due to a decrease in investments and depreciation through January. On the liability side, accounts payable and accrued expenses decreased slightly just due to accrued expenses for January. Deferred revenue decreased $20,000, and this is due to a rent payment from TNC, which we moved from deferred to revenue, and $6,000 in national grid mitigation, which we moved from deferred. New York State pension liability, again, this is the actuarial report, which ties into the assets of deferred outflows and net pension asset. Decreased, and this is due to that, just the actuarial report and the difference in actual and projected investment earning, $209,000, and the net pension liability now becoming an asset, which decreased $5,000. OPEB liability decreased $67,000. Again, this is a credit this year. Typically, it's a liability and higher liability each year due to the discount rate increasing from 2.7 to 2.83. And total liability decreased $254,000 due to pensions and OPEB liability. Our total net assets, capital assets combined with land decreased $199,000 due to depreciation expense of $230,000 and a purchase of land of $31,000. Reserved assets remain the same. Unreserved assets decreased $206,000, so a decrease in total assets of $405,000, which you saw on the income statement on the prior report. Any questions on that? Kind of a long report, but we had OPEB and the New York State retirement system actuarial report. I'm not going to say that one more time. All right, on to investments. A loss in all four accounts due to market fluctuation, $191,000 in the reserve fund, Discovery Center fund of $9,000, endowment fund, an actual loss of $237,000, and we transferred money out to the OPEB fund of $192,000. And the OPEB money, reserve fund decreased $44,000. That's with an addition. So we have a total loss of $482,000 on that. February came out a little bit worse at $600,000. We just got those reports. Any questions on that? He is here to give reports to through January. So we'll go through all our market fluctuations. Fine. Any questions on that? So I'd like to take this time to congratulate Chris for 30 years yesterday. Bush, all his accomplishments to grow the pine bush, to improve the pine bush, it's totally appreciated by staff, community, and we'd like everybody to stay for a few minutes to celebrate and have some refreshments after, and enjoy a few pictures and some stories if you all have.
I tried to reserve a dunk tank,
Yeah.
but I'm unable to at last minute.
I got that request, Chris, so I said no.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Speech. No speech.
What have you learned over 30 years?
I've learned that a slight increase in the discount rate can actually give us a credit in our unemployment account in our retirement fund, which is ludicrous to me, but that's all fine. And I've started to understand what non-cash stuff means as far as accounting. It's a long way from plants in the college. Right, Jesse? So, always a pleasure.
And in true fashion, Chris started with a blizzard of 93, so what happened yesterday? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, pretty interesting.
Great.
Yep. I won't say the same stupid thing I always say. Yeah, I will. Well, I was 14 yesterday. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, with that, we'll move on to Erin's report on the grounds project.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm just gonna take a moment to share my screen. All right. Congratulations, Chris.
Thank you, Erin.
And good morning again. Before I start on the Discovery Center grounds concept, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to the Friends and say thank you for all of their support of the education program over the past year, especially this winter. They funded us with 18 pairs of snowshoes, which are actually being used right now out on the trail. So thank you for that. And also this year we were able to do an owl pellet dissection program with local schools. We were at Woodlawn Elementary and Pine Bush Elementary. In the span of one day, we reached over 200 kids talking about local owls in Albany, Pine Bush, and then the opportunity to dissect an owl pellet. So thanks very much to the Friends for that. So the Discovery Center grounds redesign, the past couple of board meetings, I've given a couple short presentations on what we're working on. We're revisiting the grounds design and updating it in terms of accessibility, safety, and also really showcasing the best of the Pine Barrens. This is a place where people come to learn about the Pine Barrens, and their experience begins as soon as they pull in the parking lot. And so we've been working with Bergman to come up with some preliminary designs. This is very much a work in progress. This is nothing complete. I'm here just to let you know where we are in the process. We hope to have a final design by mid-April. So I'm just going to show you this to talk a little bit about some of the ideas that we've discussed. We have a committee made up of staff from different departments, and we're working together with the Bergman consultants to really take the ideas and put them into a design. So I'll just show you real quick. The last meeting that we had in the beginning of March, we went over a couple of preliminary concepts that they had, and staff had the opportunity to respond to them, where they took a couple of different approaches to remedying some of the issues that we're having with our grounds, again, being safety, increasing accessibility for diversity of people, and also showcasing the Pine Barrens. So without getting into too much detail, because a lot of this is going to change, so I don't want anybody to kind of get this idea that any one of these things is necessarily written in stone at this point. But just again, to kind of give you an idea where they're looking at different ideas for the entryway, and some of the traffic issues that we're having there. Also trying to buffer some of the sound that comes from Route 155 and working with different elements like topography to try to help ameliorate some of the sound. And then also moving a lot of the activity more to the eastern end of the Discovery Center, again, to try to really focus on the wonderful view that we have into the Pine Barrens and getting away from the distraction of traffic and other sounds coming from the road. So this is one concept staff were looking at. This is another concept. They look very similar, but there are a lot of little minor differences in these plans, different widths of islands at the entryway, and also different ideas, again, for taking care of issues such as people cutting right from the parking lot through endangered species habitat to get to the Discovery Center. So how do we try to focus traffic in ways that is protecting the habitat? So there's different approaches that they propose to that, and then also providing people with opportunities that they can really appreciate the Pine Barrens. And one thing that was kind of interesting and new to us was they really focused on the rear of the building and how can we create an accessible path, which can also double as an emergency exit path from the second floor of the Discovery Center, and also potentially allow some habitat management opportunities off of that path and get people up to a high point where they can see right out into the preserve. And again, you'll notice if you were here a few years back when we took a first attempt at thinking about the grounds, we were looking at a slightly bigger area. We really are focusing in on the immediate grounds, so not thinking so much about getting out into the trail system, but really kind of shrinking down that focus onto the immediate grounds. So you'll notice that if you remember those plans from a few years ago, you might see some elements that aren't included, and that's why that we're really trying to focus in and stick to that habitat conservation plan polygon, that area that we really want to be focusing on here. So, staff provided lots of awesome feedback, and so Bergman took all that feedback and we consolidated it into this picture here. Again, it's just ideas. There's nothing written in stone at this point, and so they're going to be taking this plan and then taking two approaches to that. So basically what they did is they took a first round of input and feedback, and now they can really hone in on some of the finer details and produce two plans for us by March 22nd that then we'll be able to share. And if people have feedback or ideas they want to share with us. And then from that point, then we'll be selecting one plan. Again, what's kind of really cool about their process they're taking is almost kind of a la carte. There's little pieces that if we like, it's not like we just have to take one plan in its entirety. We can kind of merge ideas and make sure that we have all the different ideas put together in one plan that everybody agrees on. So just real quick, also they sent along, this is always really fun. They share a lot of different ideas. This is a palette of just different places and features that we could consider that might be elements for something that we have here. We're going to have a climbing wall, but but again, they're just ideas that they share. But there's some really cool thoughts about like how can we really immerse people in a dune? Well, maybe they can walk through a dune or things like that. So it's very exciting to be thinking about and the future of the grounds, and again, really making it a much more accessible place for people to come and experience the Pine Barrens. So you'll have more to report in June. Does anybody have any questions?
Not a question, but I would offer we've come a long way from that little office in Latham.
Right. It's easy to have.
We've come a long way.
This is a great project. You know, one of the things that became really clear as we started to get back into this is accessibility. And accessibility, when Aaron and I and Wendy and other staff, we worked on this project 16 years ago, looking at the grounds, accessibility was people who are mobilely challenged, right? Walking in a wheelchair, but it's a lot more than that. There's people on the spectrum. There's people who have vision or hearing problems. There's a lot of things that are helping drive this to reach more people and broaden our diversity of attendance. And the consultants are good about, what do I always say? How much is this going to cost? It's probably a $5 to $8 million project, I would guess. But it's going to come in phases, and they've said over and over, there's lots of grant opportunities for stuff like this, particularly when you're incorporating sustainable design, stormwater control, solar, different types of energy. So that's encouraging.
Yeah, but phasing it in, I would
Oh, yeah.
imagine is part of your approach, so.
That's the only way to do it.
They're good concepts, aren't they? Oh, great.
They're a great firm to work with. They listen. They're really good.
Okay, sorry.
So will each phase have a separate RFP process for construction or implementation? How will that be structured?
So the next phase would be, that would be design documents. So we would bid that. We get this project complete. So that's design concept. Next phase, you do an RFP for design documents, and then from there you hone those, and then you go into construction documents, and then construction.
What do you see as the really radical changes that this is going to encounter?
I think mostly really immersing people into the Pine Barrens more than the current grounds allow for, and certainly anybody on the committee, feel free to chime in. All members are here. But from my perspective, it's that whole shift of bringing people to the wrong direction, to the eastern side and closer into the Pine Barrens, as opposed to focusing a lot of the activity actually close to Route 155. We have a lot that's out by the road right now. And also certainly, as Chris was saying, in terms of accessibility, like really thinking about the diversity of needs that people may have, whereas right now we're really kind of focused on mobility, but there's areas that there's quiet, small areas for reflection and sitting. There's more opportunities to sit down and rest along your way. There's a drop off, which we don't have right now. So there's, as soon as you pull in after that S curve, there's a drop off and pick up area where people can get right onto the sidewalk and come right into the building, so they don't have to go all the way from the parking lot across. There's also, I'm kind of going on and on, but there's a lot. But I think that really immersing people more in the Pine Barrens, so they're really getting a sense of the Pine Barrens in a way that's accessible. It's, to me, the biggest shift.
Yeah, I think also, the plan solves a lot of our known problems. So we have curb appeal issues, that's certainly going to be addressed. We have sound issues, that's going to be addressed. All the things that we know about. And then on top of that, it's enhancement of the district experience. So it's sort of two.
Erin, is the parking lot typically or ever full?
It can be. Certainly when we have our events, Nature Night Out, in fact, we don't even have parking here anymore. Smoky Bear Day is full to overflowing. And if we have large programs, and certainly with tenant space upstairs, if people continue to return or if there's meetings happening upstairs and we have a program at the same time, it does tend to fill up, but it's not on a regular basis, but there certainly are peak periods where it does.
I'd like to see that parking lot more green, more vegetated, but I know those spaces are necessary. But there's always such a conundrum when you come in here and your introduction of Pine Bush is paved,
Right.
And a lot of it.
Yeah, yes, yes.
Anyway.
Yeah, and that's definitely true. And I think one of the really interesting things that they've been talking about is your beachhead as you're entering. So if you look, you might see some topographic lines where they're adding a little bit more topography to some of these areas to shield and to direct your view as you come in. And even just where where we have our dumpsters located right now, kind of when you pull in, that's kind of what you're looking at. So shifting, where do we keep the dumpsters? Like even just kind of always thinking about where people are looking or what they're experiencing as they're entering, and how do we adjust that so that it's really more focused on the Pine Barrens.
Is that the reason for that S curve that you have in there?
Yeah, that's the current S curve that's in the driveway right now, but it's just highlighting some of the features around that. So one of the great things about the S curve is it really forces people to slow down. And they were saying it's actually wider than it needs to be, so we could, even if we wanted to, shrink it down a little bit, take away some of that, so it even forces people to slow down even more as they're entering into the landscape. But certainly, yes, that's very much something that we're considering is how are people experiencing this as they're coming in? And yeah, the park, a big paved area isn't necessarily telling the story of the Pine Barrens. So yeah, that's definitely a consideration.
I know you said it's all conceptual, but you also mentioned that, you know, they're sort of a la carte of this sections you can do at different times. Do you have any sense right now what would be sort of the number one sort of steps to take first? Implement first, the like highest priority sort of for portions of this?
That's a great question. I don't know that I could answer it at this point. That phasing is really going to be part of the product that we get at the end of this. So we're really kind of trying to figure that out at this point in time. But there's kind of 3 projects that are really coming together, and it's great timing for that. And one is the windows that Chris had mentioned, and part of the facade treatment with, you know, our ideas about how do we make it look less like an institutional building and more kind of part of the Pine Bush. And so having the windows be part of that, what kind of window treatments could we consider that could also help achieve something that would be helpful with this plan? And then also the EV chargers. We would like to add EV chargers to the parking lot. And so that's also something that will be incorporated into this plan and thinking about where those are going to be located. And so having those 3 projects coming together is really great timing. But in terms of how we actually roll out the phasing, that's something that we still have to determine, but something we're definitely thinking about right now.
Well, thank you, Erin.
Thank you.
Great presentation, and the entire team working on this. This is going to be a great project.
Yeah.
Thanks for all the efforts. All right, then moving on, we're going to do something a little different today. Instead of moving on to our action items, we're going to jump right into our presentations, starting with a presentation from Ryan Quay at KeyBank. And actually, Ryan and team.
Yeah. If you want to introduce yourselves, you can too.
Okay.
So, just to say hi.
Not the podium right here, correct?
Yep.
Okay, good. Chris, I gotta say something. My name is Brian. We share a little bit of a history here. I just celebrated 29 years with Key.
Yeah.
On March 15th, 1994. No snowstorm, but a very aggressive Fed action. 3% increase back then, and what we had in 22 was even worse at 4.25%. A staggering increase for sure. So we've got the presentation back in front. But we met with the finance committee last week, and what a difference a few days can make. 3 bank failures in 5 days. You know, the Fed went from a very aggressive posture to where they're going to offer collateral to banks Sunday night. So like the foundation or the endowment or anyone that is buying individual bonds, the beautiful thing there is you get your money back. But when you buy it, you're subjected to whatever the current interest rates are. So if you bought it at 1% and rates are 4, nobody wants your bond at 1. You could sell it, but like Silicon Valley Bank, you have to sell it for 70, 80 cents on the dollar. Banks generally don't do that. Much like yourselves, they hold them to maturity. So there's volatility, but I would look at it like a storm and not something to get too concerned about. Frankly, I was listening to an individual yesterday, and she supported Rick Fisher at the Dallas Fed, and she reminded the audience that even during the depths of Lehman, when it went under, Maiden Lane, which was a pretty rocky part of their portfolio, everybody got their money back, which is a nice reminder that even though you're looking at losses in a bond portfolio, you hold it to maturity and you don't panic, you're going to get your cash back. But page 2 is where we start on the main account. It's a balanced objective, which is good. Obviously, the values are going to fluctuate a bit here. When we met last week, January numbers were the only thing that we had. It is spot on as far as what we think is appropriate, you know, as far as balance, anywhere from 40 to 60% stocks, and roughly the same for fixed income. Page 3 is a objective chart that all of our clients have options. Obviously, when we meet with the finance committee, it's something that I believe you guys discuss annually. And stop me if there's any questions, but I'll try to be as quick, 15 minutes as possible with 70 pages. But I will give you my cards, you have my number, and any of you can call me, because I think it's great business, it's just a storm, we're going through. But page 4 kind of highlights where we are as far as stocks and bonds go. You can see a bias towards domestic equity here, which has been a good place to be, a little bit less so on the international front, and frankly, it's been good because of the issues in Europe, namely Ukraine and Russia. Page 5 is a snapshot of the top 10 holdings and sector weights, some household names, I think, Apple, Microsoft, Google, or Alphabet. And then page 6 kind of shows you the diversification, within the fixed income realm. So you have a lot of mortgage-backed securities, you got corporates. Vanguard holds, for instance, a 2% Freddie Mac a bond. You're going to get the 2% back at maturity, but as you know, prices fluctuate. If you can buy a 4% bond today, and that's where really Silicon Valley got in trouble. They experienced rapid growth, right? They're catering to the tech space. They're catering towards venture capital. What I did find out over the weekend, which was a bit surprising, actually Friday night, you probably all heard of Roku, right? Roku 6. They had $2 billion in cash, which is a big company, that's fine. 26% of it was held at this little bank. And it's staggering, but they did it because the way Silicon Valley played, you invest with us, you get mortgages from us, whatever, we want all of your stuff here. And that's not the way most banks play ball. And they got exposed for that. Essentially, 40 depositors made up, the lion's share of their deposits. And when there was a run on it, there was nothing that they could really do. But like I said, you got individual corporates in the two of the big portfolios. So even though there's pricing on it of maybe 80 cents, 90 cents on the dollar, if you hold your maturity, a bond is a contract. You get your money back. It's not like a stock where there's no contract. You're making a bet on a security. But bonds that's the beauty of bonds. Page 7 gives you the outflows, and frankly, whenever I meet with clients, and I've been doing this for over 25 years, frankly, the biggest piece of what I want to get out of it, what I think they want to get out of us, what do we do during times of stress? And if clients panic, they've got the wrong objective. First of all, this committee, from what I have seen, has not panicked during any of this. And we've had a decade of low mortgage rate or low interest rates in general. That's all changed. I hope, I'm kind of torn between what the Fed did Sunday night. I'm a firm believer in capitalism. The weaker players ought to go out of business. If they're been borrowing money at 0%, trying to compete with everybody, and really their business model doesn't support that, they should take their lumps. Banking is different, but again, the depositors get your money back. And I think that's the key thing to remember. And so do bondholders. Now, the shareholders are a different story. They're going to get wiped out in those banks. And frankly, First Republic was getting whacked again this morning, down 30%. Yeah.
Was Roku also a major shareholder?
I don't know about their shareholder exposure, but it struck what I recall is, if you got, $2 billion in your cash, and you've got a quarter of it plus with one, bank, why?
Yeah.
And it's probably because they had some handcuffs, or because they wanted access to some of their venture capital firms. And these are, stuff is going to filter out. But I think Lehman is a good example. That was a crisis 15 years ago. I read a very good book over the winter, and it was startling to me that there were many people in the firm that saw the problems and did their best to try to stop it. But if you have the CEO, which is hell-bent on, buying all the property they can buy, it doesn't care about 40% leverage, that's a problem. People get in trouble when they use leverage, right? So page 8, I think, is pretty straightforward. And the beauty in this account, much like the smallest account, is that you have equity exposure. So the total account was up 5% last year to date. More importantly, up 6% annually over the last 10 years. And what drove that? If you look to the far right, it's not bonds at 1%, but stocks 10% certainly drove that performance. Pages 11, 12, 13 kind of gives you the portfolio as of the end of January. And again, we produce these things, these presentation decks automatically every month. So if you ever have or want Susan or myself to send you a copy of it, just to get a different bearing, I think it's a little bit easier to read than maybe our statements, for instance. But you can see a very diverse portfolio. You got individual bonds on page 13. You can see some of the pricing. You know, bonds generally are priced at 100, meaning par value. You put in, you get out, you know, and again, all that pricing is based on the general level of rates. Rates are much different today after the Fed raised rates 4% plus last year. So, but anyway, you're going to get your money back on Apple. Do every one of these securities, even though you're staring at a loss today. That's a function of where rates are, not whether there's risk in those particular companies. Any questions on that? Page 14, if not, is really the bulk of your securities in fixed income. It's in, you know, essentially 5 different vehicles, 2 ETFs, which trade any, you know, throughout the day, and then the Vanguard and others are in funds. You know, so very diversified holdings and some tips as well. Page 15, 16, and 17, I think they're a nice addition. They show you every security and what is performed. If you have a concern, what drives performance, what takes away, you know, for performance. See. We have some commentary on page 25. So when you look at the bond market, I think many people know that mortgages are priced off of what the 10-year treasury does.
24. Yeah, you're one page.
Should be, oh, all right. I'm
Yeah,
showing.
you're
One page ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. The commentary on what we think of some of it. I think most people know that their mortgages are based off a 10-year treasury. When the committee met last year, the 10-year was around 1.6. Today, or last week when we met, it was around 3.9. Today it's 3.4. Those are big moves for bonds and interest rates, and it has everything to do with what the Fed and the expectations are, you know, going forward. What they may not know is that the 2-year treasury has everything to do with the Fed funds rate. And so we started February, you know, these were good numbers in January, frankly. January got off to a great start. It looked like they were going to achieve a soft landing, which just means the economy slows, you get inflation under control, and you don't do a nosedive and cause a massive recession. So fast forward to the earlier part of February, where we came out with, ironically, a very strong jobs number. We were expecting 200,000 new jobs. We got 500. That should be good news. But when you got a Fed that's trying to slow things down, it's not good news. So what happens? Traders start betting in that the Fed's got to raise rates another 100 basis points. So when we met that morning, the 2-year treasury shot from 4 to 5.8. That's the highest it had been in 15 years. And then the banking news caused it to crater down to 4 again. In 3 days, the movement was historic. You got to go back to 1987 to see that kind of panic, because when people panic, they buy treasury bonds. And that's what we've seen. And now we're under 2% again today. So I throw the dice to see what the Fed's going to do. You know, it certainly looks like they're probably going to go at least a pause or 25 basis points. But their actions on Sunday night would tell me that they're a little bit more concerned than what they're letting on. And the ironic part there is, had SVB, the bank, or any bank that is holding these bonds in their portfolio, had they been able to wait, the values of those bonds go up, right? Bonds are a seesaw. When you have high prices, the yields go down. What you see with your Apple bond, it's low, right? It just goes back and forth. Who's to say? Forecasting No one knows for sure, but we do know from history. And I mentioned 1994, that's the last time they raised rates as aggressively. 3%, Greenspan was at the helm. It broke. They're always going to break something when people get addicted to low money or cheap money. Back then, they broke Orange County. We had a Mexican peso crisis. They stopped in their tracks. It looks like this time, 3 banks failing in 5 days. That's going to have some side effects. You got asset managers. You got 2 iShare funds in here. Larry Fink, they manage $4 trillion. He's wondering, is this a canary in the coal mine? No one knows. But what the Fed did is really stopped the run on the banks, because what they're saying now is, and for you as well, if you're in need of raising capital and your market price is 80 cents on the dollar, you could take that good bond and give it to the Fed. They'll give you a loan. You'll get 100% of your money. Now, it's a 1-year window. We'll see what happens. But these are strange times. But again, a lot of noise, and your bonds, again, and I have one of my favorite clients. He's actually in Sweden. I talked to him yesterday. He has a $4 million personal muni portfolio. Never expected this kind of volatility. Doesn't touch the money. But I said, Larry, when I first took it over in June of 20, I said, there's a storm coming. Rates are going up. 5 minutes. Get the hook. I always get the hook. But I said, it's not that you got bad bonds. It's just that when rates go up, it really penalizes your holdings. But you're going to be good as long as you hold to maturity. What's my time? I got 2 seconds.
You guess.
Yeah.
We have 2 seconds. And people may have questions for you.
Yeah. So I'll leave it at that. The other portfolios hold the same securities. But you're in fine shape. It's just a storm. Bond investors get their money back. But like I was telling the committee, if I had any advice, I'm a big stock believer. I believe in American business, and I think there's opportunities there. Not Silicon Valley Bank, of course, but there are opportunities. So with that, I'll leave my business card, and you can call me. Please don't hesitate. I'd love to talk about this stuff and help any way we can.
We have our investment policy statement on this agenda for readoption. When we get to that, I can talk a little more about that based on the discussion in the audience today.
And I'll say that the audit committee is remaining sensitive to the market dynamics. And for that reason, in addition to our normal quarterly meeting in June, we're going to have a meeting today as well, just to make sure that we're keeping an eye on our allocations, our strategies, and to make sure we have the latest information.
All right. Yep. Just any questions? Right.
I guess I would offer that our investments have done well for the Pine Bush over the past 10 years. I'll throw that out. It's probably a lot more than that, but certainly the last 10 years. And I don't know, from my perspective, it's that storm, and we just have to hold on to it, and it'll be okay at the end.
Right. I mean, and we have an investment policy statement. That's what we try and follow that to before an organization like this, so we don't panic. Right? Go back and say, okay, why do we have this?
Right.
Are we happy with it still? If we are, then we stay the course. I always look at benchmarks. I'm no finance person, but how are our investments doing with benchmarks? They're doing well.
Brian, one thing you said that, I think you said that low interest rates for a sustained amount of time tend to break things. So what you said.
When the Fed raises rates, it tends to break things. So we had one, a private equity firm, tried to borrow some money the other day on a car dealership, couldn't get it, couldn't get access to it. But so the weaker players get weeded out. Those that are often levered get weeded out.
But those high rates are a result of low rates for so long.
Yes,
And
exactly.
it tended to fire things up.
Yeah. So low rates were put in effect for the crisis. We went down again in COVID, but initially, 08 started all this, right? And it wasn't just a U.S. phenomenon; it was a global issue. I don't know if the committee remembers, but there were up to like $14 trillion in negative yielding bonds. Who puts out a negative bond? But people were so afraid of deflation that they were thinking if it goes even worse, at least I'm going to make something. But it's really uncertain. There were some uncertain times, and you know, look at yesterday. We had Credit Suisse is a pretty big bank in Europe. The Saudis are a major #1 holder. They said we're not buying any more of this. The stock was down to $1.60, down 24%. End of day. I called Larry because he's in Sweden. I wanted his perspective. Some boots on the ground. Ironically, he was in Newark Airport. He bounced around doing business, but ironically, the Swiss National Bank came to the rescue last night. Said we will support with stock. It's up over 2, jumped over 20. It's like so much of this is confidence, right? And you have great paper that you hold. You're not holding something that has produced bad loans. You've got the government, treasuries, good corporates, good agency bonds. That's money good. The trouble was when you're trying to build a portfolio when there's no interest rate, 1%, 2%, right? That was just where we were, and it was better than getting 0 in your cash bucket. So, but please, any strategy brief. I don't forget the book.
You got the.
I look forward to it.
I tried to time him, guys.
I got the book. Yeah.
Hi, everybody. My name is Susan Sonberg. I'm the relationship manager on the account. We are offering, if anybody, and I can send the link to Lisa and Chris today, we do have a national call from KeyBank, from our Chief Investment Officer, about the Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank. And so I could certainly send you that. It's a webinar. You can dial in and just listen if you have time. I can certainly send that out to you both today, and then you can forward it out.
Yeah, send it to you.
Yeah.
Usually when you communicate that stuff to us, we get it at least to the audience.
Yes,
That's great.
you should have gotten it by email yesterday, the invite, but it doesn't, I'm gonna make sure you get it
Okay.
when I get back to the office.
Okay.
But it should be very interesting, because we've been having calls always, 2 or 3 times a day from our chief investment team, and so it's very interesting stuff, and KeyBank is a solid bank, just for confidence wise, we are in a great shape. We are in good shape, so, this call will validate that and, give you some little confidence that what's out there. So thank you for today, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Jesse, the floor is yours. All right.
Congrats.
Oh, thank you. Good. So presenting from here, just, yeah. Any place
This is
you're
the spot?
Yes.
All right, we're good. So, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about mushrooms, mushroom ID. So this is kind of, I got started with this about like maybe 5-ish years ago, pre-pandemic. We had just a great season when it was wet and there were just mushrooms all over the place. And my background is in botany. I've always kind of been interested in mushrooms, done a little bit of identification work. So I was trying to hunt down fungal species ID lists for preserve, because we got all kinds of ID lists, bryophytes, vascular plants, basically all the taxonomic groups, but we did not have a mushroom ID list in all of preserve. So I thought that it would be a great idea to make one. And that's sort of how the project started. Just didn't have a list, and it was a personal interest of mine, and they let me run with it. And so I'm going to give you guys just sort of a crash course in mushroom ID, basically everything I've learned in the last 5 years or so, of figuring out how to identify these. Okay, so
That little video was guys to minimize.
yeah, I did on my screen.
Hold on, see the top, Jesse? Can you do that, or do I have to do it on?
You might have to.
I might have to do it on this.
Screen.
Oh,
Yeah, it's such.
I got pretty pictures here.
There we go.
There we go.
So,
One of the reasons probably that there wasn't a mushroom ID list is that these things are not an easy taxonomic group to identify. They're ephemeral. Their appearance can change widely over the course of their existence. A lot of them look similar to each other, and it requires really close attention to detail, especially at the microscopic level even to be able to identify them. This is an example of sort of the ephemerality of these things. This species, Coprinus comatus, is only up for about 24 hours. So starting at the lower left, that's kind of the baby mushroom. And the way that these things work is that the mushrooms cells will be formed underground, and then they just need to expand. So as they take up water, they're able to expand very quickly because the cells don't need to divide, they just need to enlarge. So that's what enables them to grow quickly. But so we start at the bottom left. We've got full grown at the upper left. And then this species, you can see how the top is sort of closed in that mature picture at upper left. And the reason I should say that mushrooms exist is to reproduce. They are the reproductive structure of the organism. So they're basically the fruiting body. So these things want to drop spores, and with a structure that's so closed in like that, they would just be dropping spores like right onto their own stalk. So what this species does is it auto-digests from the bottom up. And that's what you see happening as you move kind of around the cycle. So as it opens up, it gets rid of the bottom layer, sheds spores from that, then that auto-digests and kind of rolls up. So you end up with this process. But as a result, if you want to get out there and first of all find this thing, you've got to just do it when it happens to be there. There's some luck involved in finding these things. And then you've got to be able to identify it really fast. You've got to be ready to pounce or it will be gone. This is an example of how the appearance can change over time. This is the same mushroom. So starting at the very left, this starts out as like almost an unidentifiable lump, and then it expands, and you can see the shape of the cap is very ball-like. The color is pretty intense. Then it widens and flattens out, and then as it dries, it flattens out and almost inverts. So depending on where you happen to see it in the process, you might think you're looking at different species. So you've got to be cognizant of the way that these things change over time.
What's the time frame there?
I don't know. It's a good question. But certainly within a week.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then there are a lot of species that look similar. So these are two different species. And there is actually a term that mycologists use for this, LBMs, little brown mushrooms, that are they just all kind of look the same. They're tannish, they have gills underneath. And to separate these things out, now I'm used to botany where you can look at a plant and even from a distance, I can identify most things at least in genus. These things are totally different genera. They look like really similar. So you can't just kind of like get an eye for it. And there are some species that you certainly can't, but there are quite a few that you have to get pretty intensely intimate with to even get it to the level of genus. So those are sort of some of the challenges. So when you're identifying, the first thing that you need to do is take a spore print. So this is another thing that, as a botanist, sort of drove me nuts at first. In all of the taxonomic keys for fungi, the first thing they want is a spore print. And it takes time to get the spore print. So you have to cut that top of the mushroom off. You put it face down, the gills down on a piece of paper, cover it up. And you've got to wait at least a couple of hours to get enough spores to deposit to be able to get a spore print like you see here. Spore color is like the first thing in all of the keys. So I want to like look at a flower and be like, oh, I know what this is. I can start to identify like in the field. You can't really do that with mushrooms because the first thing everyone wants is a spore print. So spore print's the first step. That's what we're doing here.
What's the purpose of the black and white?
Some spores are white, so they just wouldn't show up on the web paper. Yeah. This is
sort of the anatomy of a mushroom. The top part is called the cap. Then underneath that, you've got gills. Sometimes you've got other structures than gills, which are where the spores are formed. Gills, sometimes they have pores, which are like little tubes, and sometimes there are even little icicle-like teeth hanging down. Those are all the spore-bearing structures. You've got the stalk and the base. And like I said, this is the fruiting body, so the main part of the organism is the mycelium, which you don't really even see. So that's why these things are only up for a short period of time, because you're looking at the apples on the apple tree. If the whole tree was like underground, so it just pops up. It's got this, this structure that does its thing, goes away. And the organism itself is either in some wood, decaying it, or underground, connecting to tree roots. And then there are some specialized structures. The mushroom on the left here has a structure called a vulva, which is kind of a sac that the entire mushroom forms in. If you think back to that one that changed over time, at the very beginning, it was just like a little ball. That's characteristic of the Amanita genus. And sometimes there will be remnants of that, so that's the vulva. And then there's also an annulus on some mushrooms, which is a different protective layer that protects the spore-bearing structures. So it'll have a normal stalk, and then there will be a membrane that protects the gills while they're forming. And then as that expands, it breaks away, and you've got just this annulus that remains. Those are structures that can be really helpful for helping with identification of particulars. This is sort of what those look like on a real mushroom. So you've got your mushroom. So we're going to go through some of the macroscopic morphology first. So the cap can come in all different shapes. That first one I showed, that auto-digested, is kind of got that cylindrical shape. But again, you might go through a series of these as time progresses. And this is sort of just what some of them look like. Conical might turn into ombonate as it opens up more. Typically, what you'll see is a mushroom will start out more closed and then it will open up over time. But that sort of overall cap shape can be helpful for identification. Then you've got the shape of the stalk. So this can widely vary quite widely, from taper to equal to bulbous at the base. And here's some examples of that. The one all the way to the left has got this real taper as you get below ground. The middle one kind of shows you how it's bulbous at the base and tapers upwards. And then there's a really abrupt bulb, actual bulb, on the bottom, the one all the way to the right. And then you've also got the position of the stalk. So we're looking at a cross-section here. Central is sort of what you think of when you think of your typical mushroom in the grocery store. But they can also be kind of off-center, or if they're growing out of something else. There's a lot of these things that grow out of potted wood. You'll have lateral stalk. And then the one all the way to the right doesn't have any stalk at all. So the gills go all the way back to the substrate. And here are some examples of what those might look like.
Are all these pictures from the pine bush?
No, not all of them. But they're all species that could be here. Getting a little bit closer in now, looking at the way that the gills attach to the stalk is very useful in identification. So again, we're looking at a cross-section through the mushroom. All the way to the left, we have gills that do not touch the stem at all. And then you're kind of getting progressively more attached to the stem as you go. So everything from free, adnex, notched, adnate, and then the current. And this looks very pretty in a picture, but as you start to look at these things in reality and try to figure out like which one they are, it gets a little more complicated. So this is the same sort of structure. All the way to the left, you've got the lower left there. Those are free, so they're not actually touching the stalk. But the difference between free and adnex, where it's attached to the stalk a little bit, is like one of these things you kind of got to get an eye for. You're not going to confuse decurrent with free, right? But between the ones in the middle, there's some wiggle room there. And then again, as you're looking at them at different stages, things get more or easier or more difficult to actually figure out which one it is. So after you've looked at kind of what you can see with the naked eye, we start to get into the microscope. This is one thing that I thought was really fun about identifying mushrooms. I haven't done microscopy in a long time. It's fun to kind of reacquaint myself. And one of the first things you look at is spores. Spores come in an amazing diversity of colors, shapes, textures, and they can be really helpful in identifying. So all the microscopy photos are photos that I've taken, widely different sizes. So this is at 100 times magnification. You can see that I've got a scale bar right in the reticle of the microscope, and the smallest divisions that you see there are a micron. So between the numbers, you've got roughly 10 microns. So you can see the image on the left, those spores are they're like almost 20 microns long, whereas the spores on the right are, they're lucky if they're pushing 5. So huge differences in size. You've got differences in shapes. The ones on the left here are just, it's kind of got this almost faceted look. Most spores are roundish or ovalish, but sometimes you get ones like these, the ones that are faceted on the left there. And then on the right, you've got these tetrahedral shaped spores that are actually really tiny. So the image on the right is at 1,000 times magnification with a final immersion lens. Those suckers were real small. And that was before I had my reticle. For one like that, you almost don't even need, as soon as you see spores like that are that unusual looking, you can be like, all right, I've got the right species. And then there are some other aspects. The spores on the left here, you can see if you look carefully, they've got little dots inside of them, little circular globules. Those are called oil spots. So some species will have things like that to help you figure them out. And then you've got just amazing ornamentation on some spores. The ones to the right there, you can see that kind of reticulated pattern that's on top of the spores. But beyond the spores, if you take a section out of the mushroom, a very thin section, which takes some doing and some steady hand with a scalpel, and then you look in cross section at the gills. The gills are covered with basidia, which are the spore-forming structures. And basidia tend to all look relatively the same. They're kind of these prong-shaped things that form the spores. But then there are cystidia, which are sterile cells that can be widely variable in shape. And they're kind of cool because no one really knows why they exist. And depending on where they are on the cell, on the surface of the gill, you got pleurocystidia, which are on the sides of the gills, and then cheilocystidia, which are at the tips. And these are some examples of what those might look like. So we're looking at pleurocystidia here, 400 times magnification. The image on the left, you can see they stand out quite a bit from the basidia, which is kind of that pinkish layer. And those are obviously stains. That's not the color of the mushroom, although they do come in pretty magnificent colors. But these are fairly obvious pleurocystidia. They're standing free of the basidia, and they've got kind of hook-like tips. And then at the bottom, you've got pleurocystidia that are kind of a different shape. They come up and they're kind of almost square topped. And you can measure these things and look at their shapes, and that's another helpful way to help identify, hone in on your ID. And then these are some images of cheilocystidia. Again, just different shapes, different sizes, different abundances. The trichomopsis to the right, it's just the tip is packed. So sometimes these are things that give you hints. And then you can also just look at the cell structures themselves. The cells tend to be more or less the same. They're kind of long, cylindrical cells. But in this image, you've got these little bumps where the cells meet. The cells meet at a structure called a septum. And there are clamp connections, which is what's showing here in certain species. So it has to do with the way that they transmit genetic material between cells. But sometimes you've got these clamp connections, which can be useful because they're fairly uncommon, but some species have them. And this is an example of a clamp connection. Right here is where the clamp connection is, and that's kind of the blow up to the right. You can see it, instead of just going straight across, it's got this kind of little hook that comes up. It's helpful if you know that something should have clamp connections, and then you go out looking for them and find them. But they're not on every cell, so you can like drive yourself crazy like looking for them. And I was talking with a professional mycologist, Michael Koo, out of University of Illinois, and I was like, "How many cells do you have to look at before you can say that doesn't have clamp connections?" And he was like, He said he keeps track, so he knows if he looked at like a lot of them. But there's no hard number there. And then so we looked at the macroscopic characters, we looked at the microscopic characters, and then the final things that you can use to identify mushrooms are chemical tests. These are two species that chemically react with air when you bruise them. So the one on the left, all of that kind of brownish modeling color, that's from me handling the mushroom as I picked it. I bruised it up, and that the juices that were released react with oxygen in the air to form this kind of coloration. That can be helpful. And then the gyrophora cyanescens to the right is like the most magnificent transformation. This is just like a plain white mushroom when you break it open, and it stains that astonishing cyan color within like probably 15 seconds. It was from like nothing to bright. So sometimes there's these super cool reactions that can happen. And then beyond just oxygen, there are chemicals that we use for testing. The main three are potassium hydroxide, iron sulfate, and ammonia. The top two are images of potassium hydroxide that were dripped onto the cap of these mushrooms. And lo and behold, they sometimes have these amazing transformations that can help you, identify things that otherwise look pretty standard. The mushrooms at the upper right, Amanita verosa, is just kind of a plain white mushroom. And the fact that it stays bright yellow and potassium hydroxide is really helpful. The other one that I thought was pretty stunning was the ammonia at the bottom right. You've got this brownish stem, and you drip a little ammonia on it. It goes bright fusion for a second. And then there are chemicals you can also use in the spores. Onto the spores is a chemical called Meltzer's reagent, which is iodine-based. And it can have basically one of three different reactions. If the cells, the spores are dextrinoid, they'll turn kind of a ruddy brownish color, which you're seeing on the top left image there. They can have no reaction, which is the bottom image, or they can be amyloid, which is the image on the right, where they turn kind of blackish. And it can be helpful within certain species complexes to tease out different species at the species level. So after you've identified things, I take the mushrooms and I put them in a kind of a standard food dehydrator, dehydrate them, and I started a mushroom herbarium, so we have a fungal herbarium in the basement now. I keep the spore prints and any slides that I take, and I record all of the chemical tests information, whether you had a reaction or didn't. And I keep track of all of my choices that I made as I go through the various keys, so that somebody someday can go back through and be like, "Damn, this one was not right." And the keys are, with certain species, the keys are not great. There's kind of a lot of taxonomy being done right now. A lot of the historical mushroom ID was old world, and they just named things that they saw over here the same as the ones in Europe. And now with genetic, tests, they're figuring out that actually these things are quite different. So a lot of the keys are a little iffy right now. A lot of the taxonomy in general in the US is a little up to the side. But I'm working with what I have. And what I've been able to identify so far, 105 different species here, representing 69 different genera. And kind of continuing along and taking away those LVMs. You know, all the easy ones are done now. The tricky ones that I'm still working. That's about it. Any questions that you have to answer? Yeah.
20+ years ago, I had a student who's now a mycologist in North Carolina. And as her independent project, she did a mushrooms of the pine bush. So I think I need to get you
All right. That would be
in
great.
touch with her.
Yeah. Very cool.
You might remember, I can't remember why now, but she wanted to come in on a bird and you left the Nomex stuff for us to put on and we met you there. I don't know if you
20
remember
years
that or
ago.
not.
I remember Mark being in your 30s.
Yeah, I know.
I do remember that.
Jesse, I admire that you use the word ephemerality. I've never done that in my life. And so do the critters out there, the chipmunks and squirrels and such, are these things tasty?
And that's a real good question. Certain ones, yes, and certain ones, no. A lot of insect predation, even on like the things that are the most toxic to mammals. But there are certain species that get hammered. You know, lots of little bites out of the chemolids, which people also like even. But it's really variable, which I find fascinating.
Yeah, they gotta be juicy and.
Yeah. Some things, yes, but some look like pristine out there and nothing touches them. So, yeah, interesting. And because a lot of the plants are, or a lot of the fungi are saprophytic, so they're decaying other things. So they've got really like wild chemistry going on. If you think about this organism that's breaking down, wood and cellulose and these natural polymers that are quite resistant to decay, and these things are doing it. So there's all kinds of interesting chemistry going on, which I think is part of the reason some things are somewhere.
Jesse, I'm a huge mushroom fan, mycology fan. This was excellent. Thank you so much. But I also I always think, animal, vegetable, mineral, hunger.
Right.
All those things, like what is this?
Yeah.
What that aspect.
Yeah, for sure.
Is it true that genetically they're closer to animals than plants?
Yeah.
Yes.
Any other questions, Jess?
Would you recommend any for human consumption?
There's a ton out there, but it's the ones that will kill you are as abundant as the ones that are delicious. So you can't mess around. You gotta know what you're doing.
Is it legal for people to pick mushrooms out?
No, you can't collect it.
Seems good.
Yeah.
Although it happens.
Yeah. The number of people collecting mushrooms to eat, I think, is fewer than the amount of not a huge issue. No, I've never seen someone collecting mushrooms. But there's tons of those around. Okay, great. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jesse.
You're welcome.
All right. So we have a few action items on the agenda. The first one being our annual review of our purchasing and procurement guidelines. And Chris, are these guidelines the same as last year?
Yes, these have not changed. They're the same as last year. They were last amended March 15th of 2018. And the audit committee did discuss these in their meeting last week. They are reflective of those for state authorities.
Does anyone have any comments or questions on the guidelines? In place now for 5 years. Hearing none, we have a motion to approve. So moved. I will second. Second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Next up, our annual review of our investment policy statement.
This is the IPS I brought up during Keith's presentation. committee, Honor John, correct me or Nancy if I'm wrong. The audit committee, currently, the audit committee is recommending no changes to the investment policy statement. We are going to have Keith come back in May to talk to us again. So there could be recommendations for changes to this in June, or there may not. But at this point,
It seems that given the volatility and also we did experience a loss, like most people last year, that it's the prudent thing to do a review sooner rather than later.
So subject to that caveat, do we have a motion to approve the policy statement as proposed?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Next up, we are considering our multi-year contracts. Can you walk us through this?
yes. So this is a 3-year contract with Chem Energy, it's a water treatment company for basically our air conditioning system. They are proprietary. We have used them before. This is an update. We're finishing up a 3-year contract with Blake. This is a proposal for a new 3-year contract, and there's no price increase. The price is
$18,500 for 3 years.
that's it. 44, yes, there's the breakdown.
Were there any other changes from the last month contract other than just the term?
No,
I'm assuming you're happy with the services you're getting.
yeah. Chem Energy is good. Yeah, very good.
Is there any other questions or comments? Can we have a motion to approve this new multi-year contract? I'll make that motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
And
this.
Next up, Chris, you want to walk us through this action item regarding the bank account?
No, let me open it so we can have it on the screen. So this is a proposal to consider opening up a checking account with the Bank of Greene County. The Bank of Greene County is one of some other banks that continually reach out to us, primarily Lisa and I, for their business. We have been with Keith since 2009. And by all means, we're happy with them. So Keith, we have a business checking account, so we have that relationship. So that's where our money flows through in and out of, right? We have checking or a credit card. Credit cards for staff through Keith. Then there's a core investments, which you heard from Brian talk about. So Key, we have gone back and forth with Key. Key, they're not structured really to provide interest on their checking accounts. There's recommendations for sweeps and other investments. Bank of Greene County has approached us a number of times and came out with a proposal a month ago, better than we've ever seen before, particularly because interest rates are high. So with a no fee, no transactions, no opening, no closing fees, nothing, with 3.5% interest rate. So the proposal would be open up this checking account, move the excess funds that we're not going to spend from our Key checking account, which makes no interest, put them in the Bank of Greene County so we need them again. Based on an average evaluation, and that's the proposal that's attached to this resolution I sent you. Based on an average balance of $500,000, that's almost $18,000 a year. So we talked about this in the audit committee, and the recommendation was to bring it to the board.
Now, this is in addition to the key, you're staying with the key.
Correct.
So this would be just adding another thing on.
Yeah, so because we want to keep the Key checking account because we can move money from that into the investment account if we need to, but we're not making any interest. So it seems
Right.
like here's an opportunity to make interest with no fees, nothing.
So the bulk of our money would be in this new one then?
What's in it now, Lisa? 1.6, about 1.5 is in the checking account. So I think we would start with maybe 500, 800,000 move it out. And we can move it right back in, probably 2 business days. So there's not
Fully liquid. funds.
fully liquid.
Fully liquid, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So if we can make a little interest, it seems, the right thing to do. Particularly with interest rates. Interest rates are going to go, if that's going to raise interest rates, take advantage of that.
How long is the rate guaranteed?
That we don't know. I don't have that. That's not in that proposal, is it, Lisa?
No,
I didn't see it.
there is no,
Take
there's no reference to decrease. or
it away, we can
Based on balance.
move the funds back.
I guess that was my thought. Sounded like no matter what, it's going to provide some level of interest. If we decide that it's dropping too much, we'll just move it back. And they have a branch now. Yeah, because they're moving into the capital region, and that's why they're a small bank. Even in the proposal, it gives us direct access to the bank president. So if I have questions about the account, I can call the bank president. That's the beauty of the small town bank.
For part of the board, I usually speak up at this point in time, but I had to recuse myself, and I'll abstain if we go forward, because I have a relationship with the bank.
And we have the minutes reflect John's recusal from this.
Okay.
All right, well then, unless there are any other questions or concerns, can we have a motion to authorize Chris and the audit committee to work with the Bank of Greene County to open this new interest-bearing checking account?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
One abstain,
All abstained. Yeah.
which is rare for this board.
Yes. Well, again, I guess another thing too is there's no fee to close it. So if we decided to move on, we can do that.
And, Chris, it is collateralized too, so I
Thank you.
just wanted to make sure you know that, because we're public funds, we have to be collateralized. So extra insurance.
Yep. So anything beyond the FDIC's covers of 250,000. And they have a relationship with M&T collateralizes the rest. And our funds have to be collateralized.
All right, is there any other business?
I just have just a couple of things. I wanted to point these out. I can pass them around. These are new, what we call rack cards, because they go in racks, right? You've seen them at the airport. So Wendy and a lot of other staff put effort into these. So one is school programs, investigate, explore, guided programs, and then volunteering. So these are at a number of places around the capital region. They're out there too. And I just wanted to show you those. I can't show them. This is the new prescribed fire postcard. The mailing that goes out, uses 7,000 plus of these that go out. People that are within a mile of where we're burning. So we have that. Mix that around. And just one other thing in the I Love New York Winter Guide, which is what, how many days are left? Not many. But whatever the case, we're highlighted for social. Statewide. So I thought that was and that's all I have.
All right, anyone else? Any other business? Can I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Sure. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody on the show.
Very well done.
How many more?